The cold woke me first. Not the gentle kind that creeps under a blanket. The kind that gets into your joints and stays there. The kind that makes Chicago feel like a punishment. I opened my eyes to a sky the color of a bruise. Street lamps cut orange halos through the mist. Trees I didn't immediately recognize. A park bench, wooden slats pressing ridges into my cheek. My mouth tasted like copper and something medicinal I couldn't name. I sat up too fast. The world tilted. Where am I? Grant Park. I could see the fountain from here. Buckingham, dark and dormant for the season. Its stone seahorses frozen mid-gallop. My watch said 2:07 a.m. My coat was damp with dew, which meant I'd been here at least an hour, maybe two. I reached instinctively for my hip. The holster was there. The gun was there. I drew it before I even thought about it. 12 years as a detective will do that, make your hands smarter than your head. And held it up in the orange light. The chamber. I cracked it open. 1 round expended. I sat with that for a moment. Just sat with it. The way you sit with a diagnosis you already knew was coming. My hands were steady, which surprised me. My hands are almost always steady. It's the rest of me that falls apart. I tried to reconstruct the evening. Dinner at my apartment. I remembered that. Rice and whatever was left in the refrigerator. A glass of Jameson, maybe 2. Then a call. Who called? The memory kept sliding away from me, like trying to grip wet glass. A voice I knew. Something urgent. I'd grabbed my coat and... nothing. I checked my phone. Battery at 4%. 11 missed calls from the district. 2 texts from Sergeant Okafor. The second one, sent 40 minutes ago, said only, "Where are you, Reyes?" The first one, sent at 1:22 a.m., said, "Marcus Webb is dead. Shot once. They found him in his apartment on South Michigan. You need to come in." I read it twice. Then I read it again. Marcus Webb. My partner for 6 years. My best friend for 9. The man who'd taught me to play poker and eaten Thanksgiving dinner at my mother's table, and stood beside me at my father's funeral with his hand on my shoulder, solid and warm, not saying a single useless word. Marcus was dead, and my gun was missing 1 round. Here is what I know about grief. It doesn't arrive the way people think it does. It doesn't come in like a wave. It comes in like a slow leak. A hairline crack you don't notice until the wall is already wet, until the foundation is already compromised. I didn't cry on that bench. I didn't make a sound. I sat very still, and I let the information settle into me, and I thought, you have 6 hours before your shift starts. Use them. I holstered the gun, pulled out my phone, and called dispatch. "This is Detective Elena Reyes, badge 4471. I need the address on the Marcus Webb homicide." A pause. "Detective, Sergeant Okafor has been trying to reach the address, please." She gave it to me. I was already walking. South Michigan Avenue at 2 a.m. is a different city. The buildings still have their grandeur, but the grandeur goes cold at night, turns severe. I walked fast, hands in my pockets, cataloging what I knew and what I didn't know, and what I was afraid to know. What I knew. I'd been rendered unconscious somehow. I'd lost at least 2 hours. 1 bullet was gone from my weapon. Marcus was dead, shot once, in his apartment less than a mile from where I woke up. What I didn't know? Everything else. Whether my bullet matched. Whether there were witnesses. Whether the security cameras at Marcus's building had caught anything. Whether anyone knew about me yet. What I was afraid to know? That I did it. That somewhere in those 2 missing hours, something had happened that I couldn't take back. But here's the thing about being a detective for 12 years. You learn to read a scene. You learn that evidence doesn't lie, even when people do. And underneath the fear, underneath the grief that was still slowly flooding me, there was a colder, sharper thing. A thing that had been growing in me for weeks, quietly, like a tumor I'd been pretending wasn't there. I had suspected Marcus of something. Not murder, not then, but something. It had started 11 weeks ago, which I know precisely because I wrote it in my case notebook, the same way I write everything. Date, time, observation, question. We were working the Delgado case. Hector Delgado, 52, found in the river off the Riverwalk. Ruled accidental at first, but the bruising pattern was wrong, and I'd pushed, and eventually it came to us as a homicide. Marcus had been excited about it, which I thought was just Marcus. He always loved the complicated ones. What I noticed, and then didn't notice, was this. He knew Delgado's address before I'd pulled the file. It was a small thing, barely a thing. He'd said, "The place on North Wells, right?" And I'd said, "Yeah," and moved on. But Delgado lived on North Wells in a building with no public listing, and the address was buried in a financial document that I hadn't even opened yet. I wrote it down, then I forgot it, or made myself forget it. There's a difference. 3 weeks later, a CI we shared, a woman named Donna Briggs, who dealt in information along with other things, told me something strange. She said a cop had come to see her asking about Hector Delgado 2 weeks before Delgado turned up dead. She couldn't identify him, but she described the scar on his left hand, a burn scar, crescent-shaped, like a new moon. Marcus had a burn scar on his left hand. He'd gotten it as a kid, a stove accident, and the skin had healed badly. It looked like a new moon. I wrote that down too, and this time I didn't forget it. I just didn't do anything about it, which is a different kind of forgetting. The willful kind, the cowardly kind, the kind you perform when the alternative is too large to hold. His building was sealed when I got there, blue and red lights strobing against the facade, 2 uniforms on the door, a CSI van double parked, the whole tired machinery of a homicide scene already grinding into motion. I showed my badge and went in before anyone could ask me questions. Apartment 14C, 14th floor. I took the stairs, old habit, gives you more time to think. And I thought about the last real conversation Marcus and I had. 2 days ago, in the car, eating gyros from the place on Wabash he loved. He'd been quiet, which I'd noticed. Marcus was never quiet. He talked the way some men breathe, constantly, reflexively, filling every silence with some story or observation or terrible joke. But that afternoon he'd been somewhere else. His eyes kept going to the window. I'd asked him what was wrong. He'd said, "Nothing, just tired." I'd believed him, or made myself believe him. The apartment was crowded, and I stayed near the door at first, reading the room the way you read a page, taking in the whole thing before you go back for the details. Marcus was in the living room, sitting, not lying. That was the first thing. He was in his armchair, the ugly plaid one he'd had since college, and he was slumped to the left, and there was blood on the arm of the chair, and on his shirt, and on the floor beside him. The wound was in his chest. 1 shot, close range, no exit. The round was still in him. I stood there and let myself look at him. His face was slack. He looked younger than 44, which seemed like a cruelty. He had been holding a glass of whiskey. It had fallen when he slumped. The glass was unbroken on the floor, the whiskey already soaking into the carpet, spreading outward like something trying to escape. I looked at his hands. His left hand was resting palm up in his lap. I could see the scar from across the room. New moon. I looked around the apartment. Lamp on, TV on, muted. A basketball game nobody was watching. No sign of forced entry on the door. No sign of struggle anywhere, which meant Marcus had known his visitor, had let them in, had been comfortable enough to stay in his chair. He'd known his killer. I was about to turn when the CSI tech, a young woman named Park, who I'd worked with twice before, held something up. She was over by the kitchen counter, and she was holding an evidence bag with a phone inside. "Detective Reyes, is this yours?" I looked at the phone. Black case, cracked corner. My phone has a black case and a cracked corner. "Where did you find that?" "Wedged behind the counter, like it fell and got kicked there." I reached into my coat pocket. My phone was there. I pulled it out. Black case, cracked corner. Same model, same case, different phone. I thought about that. Here is what I began to understand on the 14th floor of that building, standing 6 feet from Marcus Webb's body, my mind running fast and quiet, the way it runs when I finally stop being afraid and start being a detective. Someone had put me on that bench. Someone had fired my gun. Someone had planted a phone that looked like mine in Marcus's apartment. This had been planned. Not just Marcus's murder, though that too, but me. The plan included me. My unconscious body on a park bench with 1 round expended, the victim someone I knew, no alibi, evidence placed to lead back to me. This was a frame, and the person who built it knew me well enough to know what phone I carried, which park would disorient me, that I would come to this scene alone before calling it in, that I would reach for my gun and check the chamber. They knew my habits, my case, my grief. They knew Marcus. I took out my notebook and I started over. The Delgado case. That was the spine of it. I could feel that now, the way you feel a structure once you found its load-bearing wall. Hector Delgado hadn't just been killed, he'd been silenced. He was a mid-level accountant at a logistics company called Prentice Group, and I'd been working for 11 weeks on the question of what he knew about that company's finances that had gotten him thrown into the Chicago River. Marcus had been my partner on that investigation, but Marcus had also, I now believed, known Delgado before his death, had possibly visited Donna Briggs to find out what Delgado had told her, had known the address on North Wells before I pulled the file. I found a quiet stairwell and sat on the steps and opened my notebook and wrote 3 words. Who is Prentice? Because here's what I learned in 3 months that I hadn't yet told anyone. Prentice Group was a shell within a shell, its real ownership traced through 4 layers of holding companies to a man named Roland Voss, a name that appeared exactly twice in the public record and belonged, as far as I could tell, to nobody. A ghost built from paper. Marcus had a burn scar. Donna Briggs had described a cop with a burn scar visiting her before Delgado died. And Marcus had been killed tonight by someone who wanted it to look like I'd done it, which meant whoever had killed Marcus was also afraid of what Marcus knew, or what Marcus had done. My partner hadn't just been investigating Prentice Group. My partner had been working for them. I sat with that truth for a long time in the stairwell. I let it move through me the way the cold had moved through me on the bench, slowly, getting into every joint. 9 years. Thanksgiving dinners. His hand on my shoulder at my father's grave. He had been using me. Using our investigation to stay 1 step ahead of my investigation. Feeding information back to Roland Voss about how close I was getting, about what I knew and what I didn't know. And when he'd gotten scared, when I've gotten too close, someone had decided he was a liability, and decided to make me the answer to the question of what to do about him. I thought about the night 2 days ago in the car, his silence, his eyes going to the window. I thought, he was already scared by then. He already knew. Did he warn me? No. Did he try to stop it? No. Did any of that change the fact that 9 years of my life had been, at least in part, a lie? No. I stood up. I was done grieving, at least for now. There would be time for grief later. It would find me. It always does. But right now, I had 4 hours and 40 minutes, and I had a name. Roland Voss. I went back to the beginning, the way good detectives always do. My apartment. I took a cab because I couldn't afford to be seen near the scene any longer, and I sat in the back seat and let my mind run. A ghost built from paper, twice in the public record. But paper always leads somewhere if you follow it far enough. I had, in fact, followed it. I just hadn't told anyone yet. 6 weeks ago, I'd traced one of the Prentice holding companies to a real estate LLC registered in Delaware with a registered agent in Chicago, a law office on North LaSalle. I'd walked by that law office. I'd noted the name on the frosted glass door, Haverty and Voss, attorneys at law. Voss. Not Roland, but Voss. I'd written it in my notebook and told myself it was probably a coincidence. Common name, no connection. I had been lying to myself for weeks. I could see that now with a clarity that felt almost physical, like taking off glasses you didn't know you needed. My apartment at 3:30 a.m. I kept the lights low. I went straight to my desk and pulled out the accordion file where I kept physical copies of everything. Old habit my father taught me. He was a beat cop for 22 years. He said, "Keep paper, Ellie. Computers get hacked and hard drives get lost, but paper just sits there and waits for you." Haverty and Voss, North LaSalle. The LLC registered in Delaware. The chain of shells leading back to the name that appeared twice. I opened my laptop and pulled up the Illinois Bar Association registry and searched for Voss. 3 results. 1 was 68 and semi-retired. 1 was 29 and freshly licensed. 1 was Thomas Andrew Voss, 51, partner at Haverty and Voss, specializing in corporate and financial law, formerly employed by the Cook County State's Attorney's Office. Cook County State's Attorney. I sat back. The State's Attorney's Office, which had, 6 months ago, briefly considered and then quietly dropped a financial fraud inquiry into Prentice Group based on information that had been, according to the internal memo I had obtained through channels I probably shouldn't have, assessed as insufficient. The inquiry had been dropped by a deputy SA whose name was in my notes. I found the page, read the name. James Haverty. Haverty, as in Haverty and Voss. I pressed my hands flat on the desk and breathed. It wasn't just a shell company. It was a network. Lawyers, money, a man at the state's attorney's office who could bury investigations before they got legs, and a cop, my partner, my friend, keeping them informed from inside the department. Hector Delgado had found out, and Hector Delgado was dead. And now Marcus knew too much, or had become too unreliable, or had simply decided the money wasn't worth the risk of a detective who wouldn't stop pulling threads. And they had decided to kill 2 problems with 1 bullet. I had 3 hours. Here's what I did with them. First, I wrote everything down. All of it. Every note, every date, every name, every connection. The Delaware LLC, the law office, Thomas Voss, James Haverty, Donna Briggs and her description of a man with a crescent scar. The address Marcus knew before I'd pulled the file. All of it. 12 pages in my clearest handwriting. Then I made 2 copies on the ancient printer in my office closet that I'd had since my first detective posting, and kept because I don't trust machines I can't see the guts of. I put 1 copy in an envelope addressed to Assistant U.S. Attorney Dana Ferrante, who was federal and therefore outside the reach of anything Haverty and his friends could do at the county level. I'd worked with Ferrante twice. She was relentless and uncorruptible in the particular way that certain people are uncorruptible, not because they're saints, but because they're too stubborn and too proud to be bought. I put the second copy in an envelope addressed to my mother, because my mother's apartment is a fortress, and nobody in this city or any other would think to look there, and because my mother, for all her softness in other respects, keeps everything. She still has my report cards from 4th grade. Third, I made a call. I called Donna Briggs. It was 4:15 in the morning, and she answered on the second ring, because women in her profession learn to sleep light. "It's Reyes," I said. "I need you to do something for me tonight, and I need you to do it before 6 a.m. A long pause. "Is this about Marcus Webb?" Which told me she already knew he was dead. Which told me the network was already active, already cleaning up. "It's about Marcus Webb," I said, "and about the man who used to visit you before Hector Delgado died. I need you to write down what you told me. A description, the scar, the dates, everything. I need it in writing, signed, and I need you to send it to the number I'm about to give you." "That's a dangerous ask, Detective." "I know. I'm sorry. I wouldn't ask if I had another way." Another pause. Longer. Then, "I liked Hector. He was always kind to me." "I know he was." She took the number. The fourth thing I did was the hardest. I went back to Marcus's building. Not inside. I had no reason to be inside again, and being seen again would raise questions I couldn't answer yet. I stood across the street in the shadow of an awning, and I looked up at the 14th floor, and I said goodbye. Not out loud, just internally, the way you say things to people who can no longer hear them, which is to say, really saying them to yourself. "I wish you had told me." I said that. "I would have helped you." I said that too, and I believed it, which is the part that hurts. I don't know what they had on you, or what they offered you, or what scared you into it. Maybe I never will. Maybe it doesn't matter. What mattered was that Thomas Voss and James Haverty had killed Hector Delgado and Marcus Webb, and had tried to put me on the ground for it. And they were going to discover, very shortly, that framing a detective only works if the detective doesn't wake up. At 5:45 a.m., I walked into the district. Sergeant Okafor met me at the door. He's a careful man, Okafor. He's been in this job long enough to know how things can go wrong, and he has a face trained to reveal nothing while still managing to communicate everything. He looked at me and his face said, "I know something is wrong and I'm waiting to hear what." "I need 10 minutes with you before I talk to anyone else," I said. We went to his office. I put a copy of my notes on his desk, the third copy, the one I'd made for exactly this purpose, and I talked for 8 minutes. He listened without interrupting, which is how I knew he understood the weight of it. Okafor only goes quiet when things are serious. When I was done, he sat back and looked at the ceiling and said, "You have physical evidence for any of this?" "The phone found in Marcus's apartment is not mine. They can verify that. The registration, the carrier records, it was a plant. And in about 20 minutes, Dana Ferrante's office is going to receive a package. And Donna Briggs is sending a signed statement to Ferrante tonight." "Briggs," he said, as if tasting the word. "She'll testify?" "She'll testify to what she told me. The rest of it, the corporate chain, the Haverty connection, that's in the notes." He looked at the notes on his desk. He looked at me. "You should have brought this to me 6 weeks ago," he said. "Yes," I said. "I should have." He nodded, once. That was the whole conversation about that. One nod. He stood up. "I'm going to make a call," he said. "You're going to sit in that chair, and you're not going to move until I come back." He made the call. I sat in the chair. The rest of it moved the way these things always move once they're in motion. Suddenly, irreversibly, like a river that's found its grade. Thomas Voss was picked up at his home in Lincoln Park at 7:30 a.m. James Haverty, and this was the part that nobody fully anticipated, had already booked a 6 a.m. flight to Toronto, which was itself a kind of confession, the panicked kind, the kind that tells you everything about the man's character. He was stopped at O'Hare. The ballistics on the round recovered from Marcus came back that afternoon. It did not match my weapon. Of course it didn't. They'd never intended it to. They'd intended the frame to slow me down, not to hold up in court. Slow me down long enough for the evidence to be cleaned. Long enough for Voss to get his papers in order. Long enough for whatever they were afraid I knew to be made unprovable. They hadn't accounted for the fact that I'd already made it provable, that the provability was sitting in 2 envelopes by the time they fired that round. Donna Briggs sent her statement at 5:52 a.m. Ferrante's office confirmed receipt at 6:11. I went home that evening. My apartment was cold. I'd left a window cracked and the April air had gotten in. I stood in the kitchen and poured a glass of Jameson and didn't drink it, just held it. Looked at the brown liquid the way you look at something familiar you're not sure you trust anymore. Marcus had sat at this kitchen table. He'd eaten here. He'd helped me move the couch the first week I had this apartment, and we'd been laughing about something. I couldn't remember what anymore. Just the laughing. The easy, uncomplicated laughing of 2 people who thought they understood each other. I thought about the clues I'd missed, the address he'd known, the scar that matched, the silences that were new, the way his eyes went to the window. I thought, I ignored them because I loved him. Not romantically, it wasn't that kind of love, but the kind that accumulates over years, built out of shared cases and bad coffee and late nights and grief held together in cars on dark streets. The love that makes you not want to look at what you're looking at. That kind of love is the most dangerous kind, professionally speaking. It is the blind spot that a good detective cannot afford and that a human being cannot avoid. I would have to live in that contradiction. There was no resolution to it. No verdict that would make it clean. I poured the Jameson down the sink.